I hope that my speaker arrives because she's a much more appropriate speaker than myself to talk about the Holocaust. I was born in 1980. Okay, I just gave away my age. And that puts me, a good 30 years or so away from the Holocaust. I obviously know about the Holocaust. I have family who were killed in the Holocaust, cousins of my many of them, but I didn't see it myself. Okay, let's hope Elisabeth joins us. She just had her 80th birthday. God bless her. So I don't know, what's going on over there, but I'll try and make do until I see Elisabeth join us. First of all, obviously dedicating this to all the victims and heroes of the Holocaust. Why do I say victims and heroes? This seems to me to be a debate between the United Nations and the State of Israel. The first people to say that there should be a Holocaust Day, as far as I'm aware, was the United Nations. Separate to remembering World War II victims, they specifically wanted to remember the 6 to 7 million Jews who were killed in the Holocaust. No one exactly knows the exact number. But the State of Israel changed from the January date of remembering the Holocaust date of the United Nations to sometime in April, it's normally a week before Yom HaAtzmaut, to commemorate the Warsaw Ghetto uprising against the Nazis, and they changed the name. It no longer was the Memorial Day for the Holocaust victims, but they changed it to Yom HaZikaron LaShoah Ve'Ligvura, to remember the bravery and the heroism of people who died now around the world. Just in the last 24 hours, I asked 2 people in California and 2 people in Singapore, all of them under the age of 18. Do they relate more to people being victims in the Holocaust, or do they relate more to people being heroes of the Holocaust? And all 4 of them, and again, these are different cultures, different people. So pretty much all 4 students of mine said that they think that people in the Holocaust were both victims and heroes. And I'm sure if I opened it up to the discussion here, many people would say very strongly that they were victims. They didn't have a choice. They were killed for no reason, and they didn't even know that they were being killed a lot of the time. So that, what's more victimization than that? And many people would say it doesn't matter whether they were conscious or not. The fact that they died because of their religion, or because of their culture, or because of their identity, or maybe some Zionists would say something that they died, but it automatically resulted in the state of Israel being declared. So they were the ultimate heroes for the future of the Jewish people. However they view it, there seems to be an argument all the way to the United Nations and the state of Israel. And, pick which truth you want, but it seems that from my students, it's a little bit of both. Okay, next thing. What does the word Holocaust mean? So I know that it refers to the 6 to 7 million Jews who were killed in the Second World War, but what is the root, the etymology of this word? It's not so clear what it is. The Latin holocauston, from the word holos, meaning whole, with a WH, and the word kostos, which means burnt, wholly burnt, completely burnt. Where does that come from? There is a Greek translation of the Bible, and I couldn't believe this when I read this. The Greek translation of the Bible, which is called Septuagint, they translate the Korban Olah, which is the sacrifice, they translate that as holocauston. So here we have the word Holocaust as a direct translation of a Torah word, meaning to be completely burnt up. The prophets, they use this word in Hebrew, Shoah. I'm just going to say the English version from the prophet Zephaniah, chapter 1, verse 15. That day is a day of Shoah, which is Holocaust. That day is a day of Shoah and desolation, a day of darkness and gloominess, a day of clouds and thick darkness. So there you see that the prophets are associating this word Shoah with clouds of thick darkness. I mean, if that's not a prophecy in the prophets of what a Shoah is, I don't know what. I also read on Britannica, they mentioned that after the war, the Yiddish Jews from Eastern Europe were not calling it Holocaust, they were calling it Khurban, the classic word that they use of the destruction of the temple. Okay, I'm just going to mute some people. And that's also, Khurban is very linked to a Holocaust. So all of those are just giving a setting for what the Holocaust is. When we're talking in numbers, the Jewish people have only just reached the number that we were prior to Second World War. So at the moment, again, the Pell report, exactly what our number is, it's hard to tell, but let's just call it as an estimated 15 million people around the world. Before Second World War, that was also 15 million people. So as you can see, the rest of the population of the earth grew so much between before First World War and now, whereas we have been the same for the last 70 years or so. And that's obviously a sad thing, but thankfully we've got back to where we are. I'm going to say one or two stories, and then I'm hoping that Elisabeth can join us. I'm not sure if she's here or not, and I apologize. I only asked her this morning, so it's going to be I'll take it on my responsibility if she can't make it. I'll tell you one story that made a huge impression on me about the Holocaust. The year was 1998. And I was there she is. Hi, Elisabeth. Okay, so I'm just, Elisabeth's arrived. Thank you for being here, Elisabeth. And I cannot tell you how grateful and what an honor it is to have someone here on this program who has just celebrated her 80th birthday. Happy, happy birthday. And many, many more years of good health and happiness. But also, I was explaining, Elisabeth, to people. I teach students around the world, and I was teaching some students today from Singapore and yesterday from San Diego. I was saying to them, they're 4 years old, 13 years old, and I was saying to them that they need to, there's this program called March of the Living, to go with a Holocaust survivor and see, what happened in their ancestors' past. And they didn't have an idea what it was. They had no idea where Poland is. And thankfully, I get to meet people like you and others in my life. And I'll just say one little story before I give you the table. So just thank you for being here, and it's an honor to be on a Zoom call with you. Just to preface, I'm not going to give a lot of introduction to Elisabeth because she can do her own introduction. But once when I was in the Sheraton Hotel in Israel in the year 1998, I was in the elevator, on a Shabbos elevator. Now, whoever doesn't know what a Shabbos elevator looks like, so, in Orthodox law, you're not meant to use electricity on Shabbat. So how do all these religious Jews from around the world go to a hotel like the Sheraton or the Hilton in Jerusalem on Shabbat and stay on the 10th floor? What are they expected to walk 10 floors up every time they want to go down to synagogue, go to a meal? So they came up with this cheat method, which is the elevator uses the same amount of electricity regardless whether you're in the lift or not. And it stops every 2 floors. So if you're on the 18th floor, you're stopping on the 16th and then the 14th, and it can take 15 minutes to get down. So I was staying with my friend whose grandparents were visiting from South Africa, and we stayed right near the top of the hotel. So I had, 12 minutes or so to get to the bottom. And it was just myself and my friend. We were 17 years old, and this elderly lady. And after about 5 floors of non-speaking, this elderly lady listened to me and my friend talk, and she said, "I hear you have an accent. Where are you from?" So I said, "We're from South Africa." And that was the end of the discussion for the next minute. But I thought it was a little bit awkward. So after a minute, I asked her and I said, "I hear that you've got a little bit of an accent. Where are you from?" And immediately I could see her whole face beamed, as if two young men from Johannesburg, South Africa, took an interest in a lady that they didn't know who was elderly. And she said, I'm from Lithuania. And I said, oh, my grandparents were from Lithuania. So now she was gleaming even more interested. And she said, where were they from? And I happened to be very, family oriented. So I said, well, they were from a little town near Kovna, which in English is called Kaunas, the second biggest city in Lithuania. And now she got completely excited. She said, so am I. Where do you know the name of the place? And I said, I don't think you'll know it. It was two little shtetls, like two little villages nearby Kovna. My grandmother was from and she almost passed out. She immediately started crying, streaming tears coming down her face. And she told me that I was the first person that she's ever met post-Holocaust from Vilkia. That's where she grew up. And although she didn't know my grandparents personally, she knew the place and she hadn't heard that name in decades and decades. And for the rest of the elevator down, she was just crying. And that's when I realized that how close I was to the Holocaust, where I was in a town where someone grew up with my grandparents and didn't know anyone else from the world that she had survived. So on that note, I'm dedicating this discussion and my prayers. We'll say a prayer at the end for all the victims and the heroes of the Holocaust. And I now thank you, Elisabeth. I hope that you're here. You can show your face if you are there and tell us a little bit about your story.
Okay, thank you to my friend Lev, but I'm right here. Okay, first of all, today is a very, very special day. And it's the day the survivor. And I was born in 1941 in the beautiful kingdom of Holland. And suddenly our entire country was overrun with Germans to the islands that belonged to Holland. I think it was Aruba or Curacao, the ABC Islands. Some people could escape, other people had to stay, and everything for 5 years. There was a total different situation in Holland. Our queen was gone, and I was a baby. I was just born in the Queen Juliana Hospital in Holland. Mom and I had to go into hiding. So we were under the floorboards of a little farm. Okay, my mom was from Jewish background, so I've been born from a Jewish womb. What happened? My sister was shot and died in the Holocaust. And I'm trying to make it as short as possible. It's okay with you. Okay. First of all, 5 years or 4.5 years, I think, could have been that we were totally under the floorboards. I could not see the sun. My mom had no food for me as a baby. And a Christian family who loves Israel, is totally pro-Israel, the family Dilling, took us in to fight with the RAF and later on with America. So they came back only in 1956 or something like that. But Holland in itself, and they were totally against the Nazis, even when I grew up. When all the trouble started in Holland in the 5 years, I believe the Nazis really had Jewish people were killed. And my father was a righteous among the nations. So he was in an underground movement that he started together with Corrie ten Boom and others. And they asked children to find safe homes for the time being. And 23 people I could find some years ago that he had saved. He never talked with me about it. I said, Dad, why didn't you say people didn't talk much? And I am today so thankful for my dad, because that same stamina and that same strength of standing with Israel to me. And I feel I'm also a Jew because I was born from a Jewish womb. And I feel that at this time, we have to stand with Israel like never before. That Israel will always live. It will always exist. Otherwise, the Torah and the Tanakh would not be true. I've gone back to my Jewish roots as well. Both of my grandestates have bar mitzvah and bat mitzvah. And my daughter could go back also to her Jewish roots. But as I say, the Holocaust makes a very big stamp on you, a kind of personality. For years, I was afraid. And then suddenly, when I didn't know who I was anymore, I heard one verse from the book of Isaiah. And it said clearly, your name, you are mine. I said, wow, that's great. I belong still to God, no matter where I came from, right? And today I'm thanking so much all the people that were instrumental in helping. Free accommodation for 4 years. After that, we had to restore from the tremendous hurt that has been fallen on my family. It was so bad. I was so afraid of everything. I was afraid of the dark. I was afraid to swim. Now I swim like a fish. It is just when you know from Hashem to totally say to us from his own book, the Jewish Old Testament, whatever we say, the Tanakh, that actually he says, called you by your name. You are mine. That was so special because I felt I wasn't anymore alone. Jenny was gone and my father is alive. He told me everything what he did. He was like a mayor in our city of Hengelo near the German border. He was even put on the death train to one of the concentration camps. I believe it was Dachau. Today, I celebrate my 80th birthday. I don't feel it, but I am. But I still feel that I have grown so much to love Israel and to stand with the part of Israel. And I think that in spite of all the hardships, even around the world, what is happening to the synagogues, whatever happens everywhere, don't concentrate on that for each one of us who loves Israel and who stands with Israel. My father died a very peaceful death. He was still doing gym. He was a good swimmer when he was 95. I'm still swimming, very good swimmer. Got medals. Of course, my kids and my grandkids took them home with them or to America. But I can say that at this moment where so many people are split up, and others don't take the vaccine, you cannot hear anymore the voice of Hashem. And I think we need to hear him again. We need to open our ears and we need to say, we want to follow your rules. And we want to follow whatever you tell us because there is still a calling on Israel. There is a calling on the country. There is a calling on with Israel. And if they don't, they can't be your friends. We have to really go and nail the picture to the wall, who we are and where we are going. And I am very, very proud of all the achievements that have been done by people. Today, I'm so thankful that I brought for 50 years thousands of people from different nations. I taught them about the feasts. I taught them about everything, why Israel is so important. And I think today, without exaggerating, I really feel that many, many people since all my trips have built up the wonderful country of Israel. And it is our duty. There are times to weep and there are times to laugh. But there's also time to work and time to do things. So, Tamar Lazarus, the head here in Cape Town, is a very personal friend of mine. And so I just wanted to say to you, you are special. Israel is special. I lighted my Yortzeit candle last night. But I can really feel that if we stand with Israel, I mean, that is so true. In the book of Genesis, it says clearly, if you love Israel, you shall be loved. So clearly we pray for this nation, that our government will also stand and love Israel. Then we will go much better in this country. On the spur of the moment, but I have so much to share, and especially there are some people there, and they don't know who they are. They have lived long time. Maybe you have been very disappointed. Maybe you have been going through a very difficult time. Well, not many people in South Africa have gone through the Holocaust, but I'm glad that God received out of fear into faith, out of disappointment into appointment, out of pain into gain, and out of curse that he gives us when we fulfill this one thing that we read in both the Tanakh and the Torah. If we love Israel, Genesis 12, we shall be blessed. I pray that it will go over to my children in the United States, and it will also go to my grandchildren. We have only one special task, to stand, to go. And as we believe, we will be totally separate from all the others. Because as the Jewish people have been so persecuted, including my family, there's only one way. Know who you are. He's called you by your name, and therefore you are his. Remember that. You are not going to be losing, you're going to be winner. And
Elisabeth, can I ask you a question, Elisabeth? Can you hear me?
Yes. Yes,
it's a very simple question, but it's something that I've been thinking about the whole time that you've been talking. Is that you said today's your birthday. And
okay, I'm hearing.
The Jewish tradition is that when someone reaches 80 years old, It's a sign of strength. And I'm wondering how you have so much strength to know that your sister was murdered by an alien nation to your country of birth, and that your father was almost killed in a train, and that you yourself have your brain didn't properly the structure of your brain because you were malnutrition from a baby's age because you couldn't get the milk that you needed. How does someone like yourself reach 80 years old and still be positive and have the strength that you have after you've been through what you went through? What is your magic formula? What is your magic formula of strength?
Very good question. You know, if people betray you, and if you have friends gossip about you or do bad things, look up, because there's always good things coming from above. And you have to step over it. You have to go on, because there is a purpose, and that's so good. The moment we look up, also the sun will start shining over us. But still, yes, when we think about it, we are it's very painful.
Yes.
There are times that I'm in tears, nobody understands. But you know what? Look at me. You understand that, eh? Yeah, there are many tears. There are tears. But when there are tears in the evening, there is joy.
Well, we're so thankful.
Morning.
Yes, we're so thankful, Elisabeth, that you can share. You know, when I watched your video on YouTube, I couldn't believe that the person that I was talking to a few minutes before was you. You know, I couldn't believe you. You know, like your story is almost out of like a novel that I don't think even exists. But you are the living testimony of something that hopefully will teach the world to live in, you know, more tolerant ways and better for societies in general. And I just hope that everybody remembers you know, from seeing you, from hearing you, from seeing people like you. Because as I say, I'm from the other perspective, teaching the youth of today. And the youth of today are not 2 steps removed, because I was 2 steps removed, but they are now 3 steps removed. And it's much more confusing for them to understand what bravery and real strength is.
Yes.
And, you know, thank you so much for sharing your story. I am going to say, if anyone has a question, I'll, you know, please write the question in the little chat box over here and we can get a question out. Other than that, I'm just going to go and end off with, I know we could go forever and ever about Elisabeth's story, because I'm so fascinated. And Elisabeth, as I say, I do hope to hear, you know, more in detail with you and Herbert, may he be well, when I get to see you next. Yes. Just 1 or 2 other things that I wanted to say, just to conclude. It's a hard thing teaching the Holocaust. It's not only a hard thing, it's a hard thing feeling the Holocaust. I remember when I was in Israel a few years ago, and I don't want to make jest out of this, but I just want to present a real situation of what it looked like in Israel. You spoke a lot about Israel. So on Yom HaShoah, I've been in Israel for a few Yom HaShoahs, and I'm sure you have also, Elisabeth. I'm sure you have as well. And that feeling when the siren goes and everybody becomes silent is surreal. And you feel, it's almost as if I picture myself in that moment in some type of concentration camp somewhere where there's just silence, where you can't shout, you can't do anything, you can't sing, because it's a social silence. Everybody is shushing you if you are making a noise during that minute. There was only one person I've seen ever who made a noise, and it wasn't him. It was that he forgot that the siren goes off at 10 or 11 a.m. I can't remember. And he was walking his dog, and his dog was barking and going crazy. And that was the only noise in the street, was the dog barking, whereas everybody else was silent. To end off, I teach this to all my students, dedicated to one of the heroes of the Holocaust. He's a personal hero because at a young age, I read his book, and I've read his book a few times. And the more I read it, the more I think about life. and what lessons he taught. And that is the famous Viktor Frankl of blessed memory, who wrote the book, The Man's Search for Meaning. And whoever doesn't know about Viktor Frankl and has not read his book, I sincerely recommend that you do. It's not a very difficult read. It's not the easiest read, but it's not very difficult. And he was a psychiatrist in the early days of psychiatry. And he wrote a book that unfortunately didn't get published before he went into the camps and the Nazis burnt his book. And he somehow managed to survive the camps. And at the end of World War II, he rewrote his book, obviously in different words, but he rewrote his book. And in the introduction, it's so amazing. He says, when I wrote this book originally before the war, I wasn't sure that I was correct. But now that the war has happened and I've suffered, I know that I'm correct. And I don't want to make his theology too easy, but I do find it quite simplistic. And his theology was 3 steps. His first step was he believed that life is meaningful. And he didn't say life is meaningful, life is everything. So he believed everything had meaning. That was his first step. His second step was that I've got a message for you, Elisabeth.
Yes.
Everybody sends you happy birthday and a blessed year ahead. Okay, so that's a message that just came in for you, Elisabeth. But Viktor Frankl said, life is meaningful. That means everything in life is meaningful. The second thing he said is,
I have no family.
Unfortunately,
Yes.
we won't know the meaning. We don't know what the meaning is. So the third thing is we have to give meaning to life. And he gives an example of a Holocaust survivor who had a very difficult life, unlike you, Elisabeth, who seemed to recreate an illustrious and a beautiful life with a family. This particular Holocaust survivor that he speaks about in the book was not that. Never got remarried, had a difficult life, went to a foreign land and, didn't speak the language. And I know that you speak 5 languages, but this particular person, I don't exactly know, but he had a difficult life. And at the end of his life, he has a triple bypass. And one of his friends comes to him in the hospital to visit him and says, I'm so sorry to hear this. How are you feeling? And the person who's had this triple bypass, this Holocaust survivor, says, it's one of the happiest days of my life. And the friend looks at him in astonishment. How can you say it's the happiest day of your life? You almost died with a triple bypass, one of the worst heart attacks you can have. And he said, because for decades and decades, I questioned if I still had a heart. And now that I had a heart attack, that reminded me that I still have a heart. And obviously, he didn't have a heart attack because, as a reminder, he had a heart attack because he was old and he had cholesterol or whatever else it was. But the point Viktor Frankl is trying to teach us is that in life, we have to give meaning to things. In order to live a meaningful life, because life is full of meaning, we have to give meaning to things. And that's what I want to wish and invite everybody to make this Yom HaShoah meaningful to you in some way or shape or form. I sent a Holocaust video yesterday to a group, and someone from Cape Town told me that he is fasting this Yom HaShoah to try and feel what it was like for the people in the Holocaust to be hungry. That was what he wanted to do from seeing the video. But you don't have to do that. I like to always watch a video or a documentary about the war or the Holocaust on Yom HaShoah, but each to their own. Some people light candles, some people will observe a minute's silence, whatever it is, but imbue your Yom HaShoah, your memories of your grandparents, of your great-grandparents, of their cousins, of even if it's no one in your family, just, think of what a genocide is and what that does to people, and remember the positives that come out of it to make sure that nothing like that ever happens again to our people or to any other people in this world. I'm now going to say a prayer for all the heroes of the Holocaust, including your sister Elisabeth, including your family and friends from the Netherlands, and as well as my family from Lithuania, as well as I'm sure there's some people on this call from Germany and Poland and Belarus and Ukraine and Romania and Hungary and Italy and France and all the other countries where people suffered, and we can have our intention for them. We don't observe a minute's silence in South Africa, but we will observe a minute's prayer now for all those people. I'm getting another message to you, Elisabeth. Mazel tov for not only being so young looking, but for preserving your beliefs. A prayer for the martyrs and the heroes of the Holocaust. Yizkor Elohim nishmot hakdoshim v'atorim shehemtu v'shenergu v'shenishchatu v'shenisrufu v'shenitba'u v'shenechnuku al kiddush Hashem ba'avu she'anu mitpalim bavuram תהיינה נפשותיהם צרור בצרור החיים עם נשמות אברהם יצחק ויעקב שרה רבקה רחל ולאה ועם שאר צדיקים וצדקניות שבגן עדן ונאמר אמן. Thank you, Elisabeth, Syre, again for speaking to us. God bless Herbert with good health. God bless all of us with good health and preventative measures against the pandemic that is upon us. It is itself some type of Shoah or desolation, and we need as much hope as we can during these times. And Elisabeth, thank you for just smiling, even without doing anything, just smiling and being 80 years old and showing us that you're here. That just makes everybody's day and gives us hope in this world. So thank you, Elisabeth. Thank you all for being here and thinking of all of you on this special day of Yom HaShoah, to the heroes that were before us. Thank you all for being here. Bye-bye.